Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Marcus Nebro. I am a client services specialist over at Tutor.com, and thank you so much for joining us for our second webinar in the Becoming a Confident Learner webinar series, which is, again, part of our Student Success series. This is part 2, where we're going to be going over overcoming test anxiety. Last week, we talked about how to gain confidence in class, and really, we started the Student Success series in general as a result of the pandemic. We saw that students, learners, and honestly, even employees like myself were struggling when it came to adjusting to kind of the new world that we were all living in. So we decided we'd take some of our experts on our team and just provide some more information to you. It's been super popular. We brought it back, and it's been kind of like one of our seasonal events now. And today we are joined by my colleague, Dr. Amy Dietzman. She's run just about all of our other student success series, and we're excited to have her come back to talk about test anxiety and kind of what we can do to overcome that. This is a series that I really wish I had when I was a student. So please enjoy, and Dr. Amy Dietzman, take it away.
Great, thanks, Marcus. All right, everybody, welcome to the webinar on test anxiety. I am eager to talk with you today about some great ways to prepare for a test in the weeks leading up, and strategies and steps that you can take on an actual test day, and then opportunities to examine what you could improve on your next test day. You can take what I discussed today and apply it to a test that you take in a class, a standardized high stakes test that you might be taking, or even an online quiz you might be taking from your kitchen. So take it all. So what is test anxiety? Test anxiety is a type of performance anxiety. When there is pressure because of high expectations, or if the stakes are high, people can become so anxious that they are hindered from doing their best. It is sometimes helpful and normal to have nervousness around testing. The energy can keep our minds alert and focused. However, there is a threshold, and sometimes too much anxiety can begin to impair our brain functioning. With test anxiety, feelings of worry and self-doubt can interfere with test-taking performance. And so that's what we really want to talk about today. It's okay to feel nervous, but if it affects your performance, then you may need to consider what you can do to combat that. Test anxiety symptoms can range from mild to severe. It is possible to have mild symptoms of test anxiety and still perform very well on exams. Others can feel so overwhelmed that they encounter panic attacks before or during exams. The Anxiety and Depression Association of America describes symptoms of test anxiety as physical, cognitive, behavioral, and emotional. Obviously, the physical symptoms are those you feel in your body, like a racing heart or nausea. The cognitive and behavioral symptoms of test anxiety include negative self-talk, which we will all probably do from time to time, avoidance, challenges with focus and concentration, as well as those racing thoughts that you might get during a test. And then there are the emotional symptoms, which include low self-esteem and depression. There are many causes of test anxiety and include perfectionism, the fear of failure, stress because you didn't do well on a test before, just underlying anxiety, and unfounded fears. Think of that like you're making up all kinds of unrealistic scenarios in your brain and you're freaking out over essentially nothing. Anxiety in general is very common these days, but anxiety around test days can even be worse. If previous test experiences have been anxiety provoking or led to unexpected poor outcomes, then this can add even more anxiety with each additional testing experience. And this anxiety can contribute to you feeling like you haven't studied enough, and it can lead to a sense of dread around even the thought of studying. One thing we can do to combat our fears is to think about why we have the fear and then come up with an answer to the fear. either a change in our behavior or a change in our thinking. So for example, oftentimes we say things like, I'm not ready for this test. And that's pretty realistic. One possible answer is that you need to work on your time management, or perhaps you're just trying to be a perfectionist. Another example is to say to yourself, if I fail this exam, I'm probably going to have to retake this class. Now, this may or may not be true. And if you're not sure if it's true, but it's messing with your ability to think and study, then it's probably best to go to the source, your instructor. Your instructor may be able to tell you what you really need to pass the class. And I do this for my students all the time. I can manipulate the online grade book and tell them exactly where they stand given a certain final exam or a quiz grade. In these examples, you're looking at your fear and you're addressing it by changing your behavior. As we go along today, I'm going to give you even more examples of how you can change your thinking too. So now that we know the definition, symptoms, and causes of test anxiety, let's talk about what you can do before a test to put yourself in the best possible situation. Study efficiently. Yes, this seems obvious, but it bears repeating because it's not just study, and it's not study a lot, it's study efficiently. If you feel confident that you've prepped thoroughly, then you'll feel more confident walking into your test. So you have to learn how to study. While you may feel like you have this down, you can always get more tips on how to effectively study. And I did do a study skills webinar that you might want to review. But here are a few tips for you right now. First, give yourself plenty of time. Schedule out your study time. If it's a high stakes test or a really big test, study for days or maybe even weeks before the test. Ask questions of your instructor. Ask what the most important concepts are. Ask about the types of questions on the test. Ask for a study guide. Gather as much information as you can. The worst feeling is to sit down for a test, open it up, and see essay questions when you didn't expect them. Or something like a whole section on vocabulary, which is really easy to study, but you didn't because you didn't know it was going to be on the test. Create a study plan, which is more than just scheduling time. A really efficient student will schedule time and will also schedule what to do during that time. Are you going to make flashcards? Are you going to go over your notes? What big ideas will you go over on which days? When you have big tests and a lot of stuff to study, focus on the big concepts and the details around them. Did your instructor spend a lot of time explaining something or assign a lot of additional readings on a specific topic? That's usually a good sign that it's an important topic. And then establish a routine. I'm going to eat dinner, grab a coffee, turn off my phone, leave it in the other room, and go sit down on my balcony for study time. I'm going to do this every night this week, but then you have to do it. Procrastination, I talk about this in almost every webinar because it's such a big deal. Procrastination leads to anxiety. If you procrastinate, you're avoiding. Avoidance is oftentimes worse than the actual activity, because you're conjuring up scenarios in your mind that probably aren't even true. It's better to just start and tackle it. If it's midnight, the night before the test, you're probably way too late to start studying, and you've also increased your anxiety tenfold. All week, you've probably been getting more and more anxious, knowing that the test is looming and you've done nothing to prepare. To avoid procrastinating, one good way is to jump in and take a practice test, if it's available to you. Sometimes that just helps to focus you in on the studying and gives you a baseline instead of that overwhelming feeling of what do I do, where do I start? And just as important as the actual content are actual test-taking strategies. We will dig into those. And also know when to cram. I've talked about this before. If it's a vocabulary quiz, or if you can take the test, forget it all, and move on to the next thing, then cramming can work. You just have to know when it's effective and when it's not. And honestly, it's not effective most of the time. Now, cramming all night is never the answer. and pulling an all-nighter can exacerbate your nerves. Having adequate rest, which is actually generally for most people 9 or 10 hours a night when you're in a stressful situation like this, is likely to be more beneficial than rereading a text until dawn. When you're tired, your problem-solving abilities are lower. Your brain works more slowly. This is not helpful for a hard test. Sleep is directly related to academic performance. So establish a sleep routine. For several days leading up to your test, get good rest. Set a bedtime and a wake-up time, and be consistent with it so you're not jarring your body and trying to do something totally new the day before and the day of a test. Eat a nutritious breakfast before the test, and then pack a snack for ongoing energy. Food fuels not just our bodies, but our brains. So being hungry is not ideal for a test time. Look for foods that offer a steady stream of nutrients rather than a sugar high followed by a crash. Sugary drinks, they can cause a sugar rush, which is great when it's happening, but then the crash, which could happen in the middle of a test, not great. Caffeinated drinks or energy drinks can actually contribute to anxious feelings, and they don't help us like we think they do. So my son has test anxiety, and he does every single thing I just told you wrong. He procrastinates, and then he tries to cram the night before. He pulls all-nighters, drinking crazy levels of caffeine to keep going. Then he gets a nervous stomach on the day of a big test, so he skips the food and drinks more iced coffee. So he is taking a test with a sleepy brain, an unfueled brain, and too much caffeine, which makes him jittery and anxious. This is not only a recipe for poor performance, but it's also a recipe for terrible test anxiety. Feeling rushed will only amp up your anxiety. So get to your test early. Pack everything you need for the exam the night before, if you have a morning test, and set your alarm so you can get out the door on time. One thing that you don't want to do is rush, because when you're running late, it causes you to have more anxiety when you sit down to take the test. And it's really hard to turn that adrenaline and anxiety down once it's gotten to a crazy high level. So get to the test site a little early. Take a walk around the building to help relieve any anxiety that you have. Moving your body can help remove some of that nervous energy and get your blood flowing, making you feel better. Then find your seat, get out your pen, your pencil, your laptop, whatever, turn off your phone, and get comfortable. So the last really hard test that I had to take, one of those standardized tests, was when I was becoming a teacher. And I remember this like it was yesterday, but it was a long time ago. But I had to drive way across the town to get to the testing site. And I lived in a big city where there was a lot of traffic. So I got up extremely early, and I'm already a morning person, so this was even earlier, made sure I accounted for any traffic incidents that I could come across on my way across town. The night before, I had scouted out my breakfast place. So I drove all the way across town, got really close to where the testing site was, made sure I knew where it was. Then I got myself some breakfast. Sure, I was nervous, didn't really want to eat, but I ate anyway. And then I got over to the testing site, made sure I registered, got my number, figured out exactly what room I needed to go in, and then I walked around the building a couple times. So I just did all of these things. Now, I'm not a perfect test taker, but I made sure that I relieved my stress as much as I could by accounting for all the things that could happen, making sure I ate, and making sure I got there on time and didn't rush. If you do get somewhere early and it's time for your test, you have time to create a positive mindset. Tell yourself you can do this. Envision yourself acing the test and the way that you're going to feel afterwards. Know that nerves are okay. They are a normal part of school and test taking. And know that you can't possibly know everything. Remind yourself that you don't know all the material that could possibly appear on the test, and nobody else does either. Still, you can do your best to get some mileage out of what you do know. And one thing I do is I tell myself when I'm done, I'm going to go get my favorite coffee drink, or I'm going to go get my favorite sandwich, or I'm going to go hang out with my best friend that night. Maybe I'm just going to go home and take a nap, but I'm going to do something that makes me feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I have something to look forward to. Research strategies for the test that you're going to take. For example, if it's the SAT, there are all kinds of strategies you can read about online. Multiple choice and essay tests require different approaches. If it's a teacher-given exam and you know it's multiple choice, research strategies for multiple choice questions. Give yourself practice tests and use them not only to work on your test taking, but also to practice controlling your anxiety. If you're afraid of not being able to finish the exam on time, then do timed practice questions. Even if you set your own timer, try to simulate what you will experience on the test day so that you can employ your strategies. Know what to expect. Like I said before, ask your instructor what the test is like. But instructors hate this question. Is this going to be on the test? Don't ask that question. But they don't mind questions like, what question types are on this test? Or how can I effectively study for this exam? Or are there any particular concepts I should focus on? If it's a standardized test, you can probably look up how much of the exam is focused on which concepts. So if you know that only 2 questions are about business law, then you're not going to waste all your time studying business law when 40 of the questions on this exam are about business taxes, right? So try to see if you can figure that information out as well. So you're really studying efficiently. On the day of the test, wear comfortable clothes. The last thing you need is to feel cold, or worse, feel hot and be sweaty and then feel like that's contributing to your anxiety, or like your pants are too tight and they're digging into your stomach. Whatever feels good and makes you feel confident, that's what you should wear. And remember that half the battle is feeling positive and confident. So you prepared, you got dressed, you made it to the testing site, and it's time to begin. What can you do to calm your nerves now? If possible, sit near the front of the room. You may not be the type to sit in the front of class on lecture days, but on test days, it's better to do so that you can avoid the distraction of everybody around you and in front of you. Now, if it's an online exam, of course, go to a quiet place. Don't take an exam in the same room as your roommate who's watching TV or where your mom is cooking dinner. Set yourself up in a distraction-free zone. Don't wear a watch that vibrates. And if you have your phone in your bag or around you anywhere, make sure it's not vibrating either. That's a constant distraction. If you're allowed to listen to music, choose classical, even if you don't like classical, because it is the least distracting for your brain. And don't worry about the person next to you or in front of you who may be going through their test twice as fast as you, because you never know what strategies they are actually using. And if you are overly distracted and you can, wear earplugs. Read the directions thoroughly and read all answers before making a choice or starting the essay. There is nothing worse than putting time into a question and realizing that you're not solving for X, or the essay that you've been writing is off target. Slowing down can help you stay focused. Expect a few curveballs on the exam. Remind yourself that you're not expecting 100%. You're expecting an A, or you just want to pass. Also, your sense of what questions should appear on the test is not going to match perfectly with what the writer had in mind when they wrote that test. Therefore, when you encounter the curveballs, don't get upset and lose your concentration. Instead, you can either make an intelligent guess now or mark the question and return later. Just remind yourself, oh, here's the curveball. I knew there was going to be one. Watch the clock and manage your time appropriately. Always be aware of where you are on the test, how far you have to go, how much time you're spending on questions, and how much time you have to complete. So have a test strategy before you even start. Are you going to skip questions when you don't know them? Are you going to start with essay questions? Are you going to take a first pass and then go back and check your answers? And how are you going to use that scratch paper that they give you? Most students prefer to carefully work through the questions once, rather than rushing through the exam and leaving time at the end for checking. Nervous test takers are especially prone to changing correct answers to incorrect answers when they go back through the second time. So be aware of that. If you go back and you start second guessing yourself, stop. Know that your first instincts are usually right, unless you don't read the whole question or all of the answer choices. So this is a very common mistake that you want to avoid. If you read A and B and you say to yourself, yep, it's B, and you mark it, you haven't read C or D. You can't know that B is the best answer. That's a big mistake that you just made. And when you sit down for the test, you don't have to start with the first question and complete the whole test in order. Most of the time. Sometimes you have to, but most of the time you don't. So start with the ones you know. Get some momentum. And don't waste your time trying to figure out that one question that has you stumped. Skip it. Gather all the points from the questions that you do know first. And then if time allows, go back to that question or any of the questions you skipped and try to answer them. And also just make sure that you're not stressing yourself out too much by jumping all over the place. See, that can be stressful too. You got to have a plan. That's where maybe if you have scratch paper, that's where that comes in, because you're organizing your strategy there, keeping track of what you've been doing. If you continue to feel overly anxious, try this anxiety control exercise to reduce your tension. This exercise is so simple that you may be skeptical, but it is effective. If you're feeling your heart race, close your eyes. Breathe in slowly to the count of 7 and exhale to the count of 7. Continue this slow breathing until you actually feel your body start to relax. Most people find that it takes 2 to 4 sequences. Then open your eyes and give yourself a positive and very specific self-talk. You're sure to do well. You studied hard. You're doing the best you can. This whole procedure should only take about a minute, and it's well worth the time, even in the middle of a test. Deep breathing can slow down a beating heart or a racing mind. So practice these techniques at home. The very act of concentrating on breathing and thinking can biometrically alter your anxious feelings. Nervousness isn't always bad. Nerves can actually be used to help you focus. So just focus on the breathing. Before entering college or maybe certain high school classes, you may have been a perfectionist who went into exams feeling you had studied everything you needed to know. You might be a perfectionist in your job. It can be emotionally difficult to let go of perfectionism, but you must try. In college, it is virtually impossible to learn every detail. So you need to focus on the most important concepts and learn those well enough to be successful. Remind yourself that your understanding of major concepts is going to help you guess well on some of the details that you are unable to recall during the test. You may be able to eliminate more of the wrong answers. You may be able to draw some conclusions based on what you know about some of the answers. You may be able to connect one question that you did know to one that you don't know and make an educated guess. So studying helps you all the way around. And remember, this is problem solving, and you can't do this well if you're exhausted. To help curb your perfectionism, try this. Just know when you've done your best. Sometimes your best will be a C, and sometimes your best will be an A, but know yourself and know when you've tried your hardest without killing yourself, which means you need to set realistic goals. Last week, we talked about a mission statement, and I shared with you one where a student set a goal to achieve an 80% or better on all tests and an 85% or better on all written work in a particular class. Maybe you aren't that specific, but know what you're asking of yourself. Beware of undue pressure. And if you think a class is going to be one way and you discover a couple of weeks into it that it's either way easier or way harder than you expected, adjust your goals. So you took the test and you're walking out. If you're like me, you might be the type of person who overanalyzes every single part. But if you've already had a lot of anxiety leading up to the test, the best thing you can do for yourself now is let it go. Don't give a test the power to define you. An exam won't tell you whether you're the most brilliant or least brilliant student in your class. Your performance on exam day mostly depends on how effectively you studied and the test taking strategies that you used. So take yourself out or meet up with a friend. Go for a walk or get an ice cream cone. Take some deep breaths and don't overanalyze. You'll get your results soon enough, and then you can evaluate your performance. At this point, a lot of students are over it. They look at the test and they just like say, whatever, it's over. There's nothing I can do now. But that's a terrible move for a student who's looking to improve test anxiety or their testing strategies, or they want to improve their overall grades. Evaluate what you did well and where you should have focused more. Revisit your notes and determine if you need a new note-taking strategy or if you need a new study strategy. Don't repeat the same study mistakes over and over again, expecting different results. And take some time to evaluate your whole plan of attack and come up with a new plan. So here are my reference links. And my next webinar next week is how to gain confidence in your writing. So same time, same place. Hope to see you there. And now I would love to answer questions. Back to Marcus.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the webinar. And it looks like we actually got a couple of questions. So right before we get to questions, which again, if anybody does have any, just submit them through the question box. We did want someone to go back to the references slide real quick. So if you can do that, I will remind everybody that there will be a follow-up email that will include a recording of today's webinar as well as all the slides. So you don't have to worry about writing down all these different links. But if you want to check them out now, here you go. Um, Again, people are asking about part one. Is that available? It is available on our YouTube channel. If you can go back to, yep, there you go. Tutor.com/YouTube webinars will bring you right over there. So you can view both the previous webinar as well as all of our other student success webinars. And also just be sure to follow all of our socials. That way you'll be aware whenever any other webinars are coming up, whenever we're doing a new series and whatnot. But yeah, so we do have a couple of questions. Some of these might be things that you went over already, but somebody wanted to kind of ask again. How do you handle open book tests? Because those can be a lot harder than tests requiring like memorization. So how do you handle like the stressful situation of those kind of tests?
That's a good question. So first off is again to have your strategy. You know, how long are you going to go searching through your book to find the answers to the questions that you don't know, right? Or the ones you don't even remember ever reading or seeing. So have a strategy for the ones you're going to skip, the ones that you don't need to go through your book for. Maybe you start with those and you answer those. Again, don't be a perfectionist. If you know the answers to questions, select the right answer and don't go searching through your book just to make sure that you're right, because that's probably a time waster if it's timed. So I would say go through the questions you know, answer them, then go through the ones you're pretty sure you saw in the book, and then flip through the book to find those answers. And then lastly, do the ones that you're like, I have no clue where that would even be. I don't even ever remember seeing that, and then do those. So you're aware of your time management, you have a strategy, and I would definitely say too, don't be afraid to stop. Control your breathing. When you start to get nervous, you're like, when you start to see those questions, those curveballs, they're always going to be there. Take some deep breaths, give yourself a self-talk, and then keep going.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's something that I always struggled with, was constantly double checking all of my answers, even if I was pretty sure
Yep,
that I had the idea. And then at the end of the test, I had too many questions and not enough time.
right.
Um, Yes. So we also kind of on a different type of test. How do you handle pop quizzes, or what would you recommend if your teacher says like, "Hey, you're going to have pop quizzes throughout the semester"? Kind of how do you become confident with those?
Truth, those are tough. Those are tough. So obviously this goes to the study strategies and some of the things I talked about gaining confidence in your class. In my last webinar, it's really about being engaged in the class at all times. So you're taking notes, you're paying attention. Note taking helps you be engaged, even if the class was maybe a little dull, maybe a little boring, maybe a little long, maybe it's at a bad time of day for you, like a 7 a.m. class or something. So if you're engaged always, you're taking good notes and you're paying attention, you're asking questions, you're reading all the materials you're given. Don't be afraid to spend some time reading all the stuff. And that's one thing a lot of students skip. Like that doesn't look that very, that's going to be very good, so I won't read it. That kind of stuff is going to make you feel prepared though. So you're prepared for whatever pop quiz might come. So the preparation is big, being engaged in class is big. The nerves you're going to feel when that pop quiz comes up, I mean, you're going to feel them. That's always scary. It's always like, what is this going to be? But then go back to your breathing, go back to your, here's my curveball. I knew these pop quizzes were coming, right? So tell yourself, I can do this. And then just rely on what you know. That's the best you can do, is rely on what you know and what you've learned and the fact that you've been paying attention. That's the best you can do.
Awesome. And similarly, in order to kind of really get comfortable when it comes to taking a test, you have to be able to fully read the questions and understand what it's asking. For people who might have, reading comprehension difficulties,
Mm.
especially when it comes to tests, how exactly do you practice that? Do you recommend just kind of finding practice tests online and getting comfortable with the type of verbiage that folks are using?
Yes. I also recommend that you use, if you can, if it's like a written test, that you're using circling and underlining different things to understand what it's asking you. One of the things that my son and I talked about was how hard it is when a question is like, which one of these is not right? And then some of the answer, you kind of confused when you're reading them, you're reading the answers, you're like, that is right. Am I looking for what's right or what's not right? And you start asking yourself that. Don't be afraid to cross off different words and look, if it says what is not right, say, I'm going to read all these and find the ones that are right. Just these kinds of things, but it's all practice. It definitely is practice. So it's definitely finding as many practice questions as you can online to see the different ways that questions are framed, and then reframe them in your mind. Don't be afraid to rewrite the question or circle the verb. What's it asking me to do here? And then also don't be afraid to cross off the wrong answers as you're going. I know it's not this one and I know it's not this one. Now I have a 50-50 chance. So all of those kinds of things are really important. But yeah, you sometimes have to break those questions apart. And also, when my son and I were studying for the real estate exam, we noticed that they throw extraneous information into the questions, just throw it off, like they'll write a whole paragraph, and some of the details are not even part of the question at all. And so we got used to trying to read a question, read the first sentence, process, read the second sentence, process, and then we would get down to what they're really asking, then we'd go back and cross off all that. We don't even need to know that doesn't even matter, and cross it off. So those kinds of things though all take practice. So practice tests are important if you can get them.
All right, awesome. And we've gotten a large number of questions about brain freeze or your brain going blank due to nerves. I know you've talked a lot about like breathing exercises and stuff like that. Is there anything else that you'd recommend for those moments where you just suddenly have no clue what's happening?
Mm-hmm. The best thing there is you really need to get a little bit of momentum to start to like unfreeze the brain. So that's where your strategies come into play too. And that's why I recommend sometimes it's better to start with an essay question, because maybe your brain won't freeze on an essay question. Not for everyone. For me, the essay questions were usually the best place for me to start because I felt most confident in those. So sometimes that's the case. Maybe you just need to start writing and kind of just, let let it all go, let it all start to flow a little bit. This is what I know. And then other times, no, the writing is the worst thing. So maybe if there's an essay question first, skip it, go to what you do know. And this is all, one of those things where it takes practice. It takes getting in there and having success, knowing that you're not going to get every single one of these right. You're going to do the ones you know, self-talk. I mean, that's the best advice I have. I don't know how to tell you how to make your brain unfreeze other than that, probably one of the things you need to do is really, really breathe and walk around the building ahead of time. Make sure you've eaten, make sure you've had good rest. All those things I said will help with that.
I will also say, just on that note, something that helped me personally when it came to taking tests, and this kind of differs from subject to subject, but in some cases, I would just skip the question and move on and then come back at the end, because one thing that I noticed is, let's say the question is asking one thing, that question will be answered by other questions later on in the test. So you'll be able to take information from the other questions and apply it back to something that you weren't too familiar with. So that's
Yep.
also something that might be helpful. If you're ever completely stuck, you don't know how to do this one question, skip it and come back, and chances are something else might, flick a switch in your head and remind you of like the answer or the solution to that problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's gotten me out of a lot of sticky situations in college. I will say that much.
Yep.
Um, yeah. So also we've had a couple of more things about distractions. So whether you have assigned seats so you can't move to the front and you're dealing with distractions around you, or if you're taking a test online and the teacher is watching you through a webinar, not a webinar,
Mm-hmm.
a webcam,
Mm-hmm.
or even additionally, let's say you're just taking a test and the teacher's pacing back and forth up and down the aisles and looking at you. How do
Oh,
you
hate that.
handle the stress that that gives you? Because it can be terrifying.
That is scary. And yes, I know a lot of tests now that you're on a webcam and you're feeling like somebody's just staring at you. And I know all of that is hard. And I used to like hear if the teacher was walking back and forth, like the clicking of their shoes used to drive me nuts. And so that's why if you can wear earplugs, if you are allowed to listen to music, that may help. And at some point, you just have to say, it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing in here. It doesn't matter what anybody else is doing in here. It's just me. It's just me. You have to talk to yourself like that. But eliminating distractions, I mean, sometimes you just can't. You just can't. Or you got someone next to you who's chewing gum loud or whatever. So anything you can do for sound is good. And ask your instructor. Maybe nobody else is puts on their AirPods, but maybe your instructor will say, yeah, I don't care if you do that. So ask if that's allowed. And also when you're doing a test at home, more than likely you can play music, even if it's like kind of playing in the other room, to sort of just help calm your nerves. And again, I always say classical music is the best. It really is good for your brain. So I always recommend that too. But there's no like cure. You can't suddenly make the instructor, stop staring at you or stop pacing, or the person next to you stop flipping their pages loudly. I mean, you just can't do it. So it just comes down to talking yourself through it. This is only me. It's me in this test. I can do this.
Yeah, also just reminding yourself, because a lot, at least for me, when the teacher was pacing back and forth, it felt like they were judging me a lot. Just remember that they probably aren't judging you, and
No.
that's a thought that you have in your brain, because that will make you start overthinking. If a teacher walks by while you're circling an answer, and then you start overthinking and being like, no, maybe it's not B, maybe it's C. Stick with your gut, like Amy said earlier in the presentation. But yeah, the teacher probably isn't judging. They're just walking back and forth because they have to do something for an hour.
Yeah, maybe they're tired and just trying to stay awake.
Exactly. I mean, I know that I was having that problem during my tests. I can only imagine what a teacher was doing when they didn't have anything else to do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so there was one question that I thought was really interesting: how to deal with let's say a test is coming up on October 1st and you're studying, and then 1 or 2 days before that, it gets pushed back like a week. And now, on top of having to study for that, you have all this new information that's coming in from, just class and taking notes. How do you kind of adjust to having your schedule or your planned schedule kind of thrown out the window?
Ooh, that's a good one. I can relate. I'm not a spontaneous person at all. I like everything to be planned. And when something like that happens to me, it throws me for a loop. So I get it. It goes back to not being a perfectionist, remembering that you know what you know. You've done the best you can in the studying. So maybe you studied really, really hard. You've gone through everything. You've practiced. You've gone over flashcards. You know it. Maybe something else now has come up. You have to prioritize that. And then you study again for this test, maybe the day before or 2 days before, because you've already done all the studying leading up to it. So you have to tell yourself, I've done everything I can. I know what I know. And now I'm going to write a paper, and then I'm going to study for this other exam I have or whatever. So that I get that it's frustrating, but again, there's no like magic bullet to just make it not be frustrating for you, because you had really good intentions and you had great time management and you were doing the best you could. So just know that it's okay to switch your focus on something else. I know I just said study for days or weeks before a test, and you're probably thinking, but sometimes I did, and then it throws me off, right? So then sometimes you have to say that's not going to work this time, and that's okay.
Yeah, great question. Great answer. Also, another thing, just from my personal experience when it comes to college specifically, office hours are going to be your best friend because that is when the teacher will often kind of tell you a bit more in detail. They won't exactly say this X, Y, and Z is going to be on the test, but they'll be able to provide you with a little bit more insight on kind of what they're planning, on top of just getting help for things that you might not be too familiar with, which can then also decrease the stress that you're facing when you're taking those tests.
Yep.
Um, all right, it doesn't look like we have any other questions coming in. Just one more question, kind of on time management in a test. How long should you be spending on a single question? How do you know when you're taking too long? Kind of what do you do in those situations?
Yeah, so I mean, you might have to do a little quick math in your head. Look at the clock, look at how many questions you have, and kind of do some quick division. How many minutes should I be spending on each question? And so in every subject is different. Some subjects, you should only be spending a minute on each question. And some, if you're doing math or you're having to do some kind of, you know, formula or something, it can be more than that. So I can't say that there's a rule of thumb. It's a matter of looking at the clock and knowing if you're spending 2 or 3 times longer than what you're spending on everything else on one question, that's probably a good sign to skip that question for now and come back to it. The worst thing you can do is spend, a whole bunch of time on one question, and then you run out of time to do all the ones that you knew, because the ones you know are the ones you are going to get those guaranteed points for. It's the ones you don't know that you may or may not get it right. So you may as well not spend too much time, skip it, come back when you have the time later. So that's the best advice I could give. There's not really a rule of thumb. It all depends on the questions. And then always give yourself time for those essay questions, which always take longer. So make sure you're kind of managing your time that way too, and try it. Don't be afraid to try it a few different ways. Maybe you take a test and you do your essay questions first once and see how the time management feels and how the nerves feel. And then the next time, flip it, try it the other way. If you feel like, I don't think that worked for me, try it the other way. So that's my best advice.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It doesn't oh, actually we got one more question, and this will be the last question before we end it for today. But how do you handle a test where you can't skip a question? Or for
Mhm.
example, where if you skip a question, you can't exactly go back to it, so you have basically one shot
Yep.
at that question. How do you kind of handle that situation?
Okay, so that's where your guessing problem solving strategies are going to come into play. So you're going to read the question, you're going to eliminate the ones that you know aren't correct, and then give it your best guess. Obviously, you'll be using the rest of the test to help kind of formulate those guesses, right? So you just answered the question before, you knew that answer, and now this next question kind of relates to that one. So you kind of know sort of what's wrong in the answer choices. That's going to help you problem solve. Guess and move on. Again, don't spend too much time. It's better to guess in these situations when you can't go back than to spend too much time and then not get the rest of the test done. So just, again, you're paying attention to time management. You know about how much time you have left, how much of the test you have left. Hopefully there's something that's telling you how many questions are ahead. And so you're just following that strategy throughout. Is, okay, this one I don't know. I'm gonna give my best guess. I'm gonna move on.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for all the fantastic questions. Again, that is all for today. Be sure to follow all of our socials. And also, again, there will be a follow-up email sent out with a recording of this webinar along with the slides, as well as information on how to sign up for our next webinar, which is going to be talking about how to gain confidence in your writing, again, presented by Dr. Amy Dietzman. But thank you all so much for joining, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day and enjoy the weekend.